A Land Under a Red Sun, Tomb of the Dragon King. Chapter 3. Diomedes, the Patron. Over the course of several hours, as the red sun slowly descended in the sky, Diomedes made his way out of the very edges of the Tenebrous. The transition from the vibrant green and cool shade beneath the tree canopy to the sparse trees on the rocky, ash-covered ground was stark. The trees and vegetation here were more weathered and arid with a brown hue. He heard a noise over the hill. He crouched and crept toward it, peering over the crest. He saw a dust dog trapped in a shallow vine pit. The blood vines of the northern parts of the continent were particularly dangerous, natural hazards in a world full of them. They burrow their roots deep before expanding outward to create a cavity in the earth. Once large enough, they produce small but robust leaves to allow dirt, sand, or ash to cover them, making a small foothold trap. Inside the hole, there would be sharp, needle-like barbs that would constrict around whatever got caught in it, drinking the blood for nutrients and water. Diomedes descended the hill with care, checking for any other blood vines nearby. Seeing none, he moved toward the trapped dust dog. It was a large, lean, predatory, scaled, canine-like beast that stalked low to the ground in a crouch. Its body was gaunt and skeletal, with visible bone pressing through stretched, pale hide. The head was broad and flat, with a wide, tooth-filled mouth, and a short ridge of dorsal spines ran down the neck and back. Despite its emaciated appearance and current entrapment, it radiated coiled, dangerous energy. It was a younger dust dog, from what he could tell, about the size of a man. It snarled at him as he approached, its small, beady black eyes shimmering in the red sun, watching him. He held out a hand and let it hang there, giving the beast time to decide he wasn't a threat. His own eyes stayed calm and unafraid, but his other hand had already curled into a fist, ready. "Come on, big guy. Let me help you," he said. The dust dog snarled one more time before Diomedes touched the top of its head. The beast's anxiety was palpable. "If you calm down, I can help you," he continued. He petted the beast, and its struggle against the bloodvine eased. Diomedes moved with careful speed, tracing down to its left hind leg, which was caught fast in the bloodvine. The beast's ankle was completely within the constricting plant. The blood around it was being coaxed out by a natural bleeding poison on the plant's barbs. The harder the dust dog struggled against the trap, the deeper the barbs cut. He would need to induce the plant to release on its own. Simply killing the plant wouldn't do that. He reached for his coin purse and opened it, pouring the contents out onto the ground. He carried a mix of currencies from across the continent: triangular iron coins, square copper coins, a large oval silver piece, and a single, small hexagonal gold piece. He picked up the silver coin and weighed it in his hand, then gathered the rest back into his coin purse. A large, flat stone and a smaller one lay nearby on the rocky, ashy ground. He set the silver coin on the flat one and began to fold it. It curled. He flipped it and folded again, and this time it split, revealing exactly what he'd expected. The coin was silver-coated lead, a common trick for debasing or counterfeiting currency. It ran a little heavier than it should have, which actually helped the deception, since most commoners and nobles alike preferred the weight of a heavier coin. He shook his head at the thought. This had been payment for services rendered. He should have insisted on iron. He'd have kept working the coin until the little silver and lead in it was thoroughly mixed, then rolled it as flat as the soft metal would allow. No easy task in the heat. When he finally had a thin, flat plate, he folded it into a small stake and drove it into the puddle of urine the dust dog had likely left after realizing it was trapped. He'd used a similar trick once to kill a slum lord. He left the stake a few minutes before retrieving it, then set a hand on the dust dog's leg. "Be calm, friend." He worked the stake gently into the side of the bloodvine, then drove it in with one sharp jab to let the poison do its work. He pulled back. It would take some time, and drew out his water skin for a sip. The dust dog whimpered. "I barely have enough for myself. You can find your own water when you're free." He wasn't sure why he was trying to justify his logic to a beast. He sat for about an hour before returning to the bloodvine. The poisonous metal had begun to seep into the plant. He worked the stake free, moved it to a new spot, and repeated the process. This time, when he jammed it home, the bloodvine recoiled and released out the leg. The beast pulled free, bleeding, and curled up to lick its wounds. "There you go. Be more careful next time." Diomedes pulled the stake free. He might find a use for it later, and stood, dusting himself off. He needed to clear the Tenebrous before nightfall. He'd trust the ash desert in the dark before he trusted the cursed vegetation. The forest thinned and finally gave out entirely, until nothing remained but rolling dunes of dark grey volcanic ash, dominating the land in every direction. The red sun dipped low on the horizon, touching the mountains along the coasts of the boiling seas to the west. He found a low spot between two ash dunes and drew a circle around where he'd make camp. He was missing most of his supplies from the vampire's hunt, but he didn't actually need much. He found a comfortable angle in the ash, closed his eyes, and was asleep within minutes. He woke as the first light of the red sun peeked over the eastern horizon behind him. He'd woken a few times in the night against the cold, but had managed to fall back asleep each time. Now that it was light, he could move again. Too many dangerous things stirred after dark to risk traveling through it. He stood, worked the stiffness out of his shoulders, and began moving west once more. After a few hours, he came across a barely maintained gravel road cutting through the ash dunes. It ran north, not the direction he was heading, and he moved to cross it and continue west. He made it halfway before he stopped. The pull that had been directing him west had changed. He couldn't put a name to the feeling, only that he'd learned to trust it, and now it was shifting, caught somewhere between west and north. He looked west, then turned to face north instead. The feeling sharpened at once, but so did the doubt. He'd carried this inexorable pull since he was young, as if fate itself was steering him, and he would be lying to himself to call it always benevolent. It had led him into danger more than once. Never danger he couldn't handle, but danger all the same. He'd ignored it before, too, and that had never led to ruin either. He'd spent enough time weighing it already. He wiped his head and face with the small cloth he carried, turned north, and followed the road. Whatever waited for him, he trusted himself enough to handle it. That much, at least, he was certain of. More mountains rose to the north, curving together into one massive peak that dominated the continent's northwestern coast. He had never learned its name, but he'd seen it before. Years back, when he was traveling along the dangerous coastline with a band of brigands, giving the interior a wide berth. Of the 3 ranges that met there, 2 ran along either side of the valley he'd been working his way into for the better part of a day. The valley itself was called the Dragon's Tail, named for how it stuck out from the main ash deserts to the south. He'd heard stories that the great dragon who'd burned the continent and carved out the ash deserts had come from this valley, or gone to it. The myths disagreed on which, and that this was why the land here was cursed to remain ash forever, burned by dragon fire. A day and night passed on the road, the surface easing gradually from gravel to rough cobble, and finally to laid brick. As the sun lowered on the second day, he came upon the ruins of one of the great cities that had once lined the north-south road running the length of the continent. Burned now, like everything else here, to a husk of ruined stone reaching into the sky like tombstones for the thousands who died in the fire. Firelight flickered among the ruins, in the remains of one of the tallest buildings. Few would be foolish or brave enough to light a fire in a place like this unless they were confident in their ability to defend it. Diomedes considered this for a moment, then picked his way through the rubble and ruined streets toward the flame. He found a small camp populated by bloodkin, one of the more vicious goblinoid peoples. They stood about a head shorter than an average man, but just as broad, with long, wiry limbs and angular, triangular heads, completely hairless, with black, pupilless eyes and dark crimson skin. They were named for these traits, which allowed them to survive the harsh light of the red sun while still seeing in the moonless, starless nights. Most bloodkin practiced ritual marauding and raiding, capturing slaves, livestock, and food, but it was less cruel than it sounded. That discipline was reserved for those within the tribes proper. Bands like this one, cut loose from tribe and ritual both, was something else entirely, far more vicious, and often worse. Diomedes could tell as much from the absence of any shrine to Kirbakarath, or not even a small one, at the center of the camp. Kirbakarath was patron to all goblinoid peoples, a god of both violence and restraint, and, like most old gods, a walking contradiction. Or so it seemed to him, anyway. He knew as much from his own time defending and riding alongside bloodkin raiding parties. They kept a fairly strict code of honor for a culture so steeped in blood and violence. But the untethered ones, bands like this, were vicious, bloodthirsty, often cannibalistic. Diomedes kept to the shadows at the edge of the ruins, looking down over the encampment. 8 of them sat around the fire, working at various tasks, armored in leather and fur and armed with spears, rust-patched iron swords and wooden clubs, with only one carrying a shield. More than 8 bedrolls were scattered nearby, which meant there were likely more out somewhere. Then he saw the cage, 3 huddled figures inside, in a cage built for a beast, not for people. Merchants, or at least one of them was. Victims of some raid. Diomedes decided to rescue them. It wasn't entirely altruistic. Merchants often carried coin or goods he could use, and it was easier to get them as rewards than from the end of a sword. Having a merchant owe him a favor in a city was never a bad thing. He was, however, unarmed. He would need to rectify that before taking on such a number, and he would need to do it quickly before the rest of their group returned. He looked down at the rubble of the building to find a palm-sized rock. He picked it up, looking for a connected, unroofed room near the main area where they were camped. Finding one nearby and suitable, he threw the rock at the upper rim. He was moving before the sound was made. His sandaled feet took him toward the room he had thrown it at. The rock clattered against the walls and other rocks echoing from that part of the structure. 4 of the bloodkin looked toward the sound. The largest of them grunted something in their harsh language. Diomedes didn't need to understand the words to know what "go check that out" sounded like. 2 moved toward the room, 1 with a spear, 1 with a sword. 2 he could handle. He didn't prefer it, but it was doable. Being armed would have made him more confident, but he knew that kind of confidence was its own slow poison. He reached the room just ahead of them. Their shadow sight would make hiding in darkness pointless, so he scrambled up to the 2nd floor instead and lay flat against the crumbling stone. He listened as they spread through the room below, checking corners and hidden spots for any sign of an intruder. Diomedes eased to the edge, quiet as the gentlest wind, and looked down just as they turned to walk away. He dropped, timing his landing to their footsteps. He came up behind the one further back, the one with the spear, and kicked out his knee from behind. As the bloodkin fell, Diomedes caught his jaw and chin, and, with one violent, powerful yank, snapped his neck. The sound of the body hitting the floor alerted the other one, but Diomedes already had the fallen spear in hand. He threw it, and it took the 2nd bloodkin through the chest and heart. A small sound escaped him before he, too, dropped, dead. Diomedes knew they'd be on him fast, since the sound would carry to the others. He grabbed the fallen iron sword, no time to free the spear from the 2nd body. He turned on his heel and readied himself as 3 bloodkin came through the entrance at a dead run, driven by everything but caution. He slashed the first, the one with the club, across the throat. The other 2 came at him together. One thrust a spear, which he dodged. The other swung a sword down at him. He parried on reflex with his forearm, normally shielded by a bracer, now bare, and the blade grazed him, splattering blood across the floor in a burning line of pain. He pivoted and drove his blade through the swordsman's chest, snapping the man's cheap sword clean off at the hilt. He turned to dodge the spear thrust again, then seized the shaft with both hands and wrenched it free. The last of the 3 yelped and bolted back toward the main camp. Diomedes was hot on his tail, chasing him back toward the fire, then turning on the one bloodkin carrying a shield and rushing him. He leapt, his spear slipping past the shield, raised to block it, and driving through the man's lung and ribs instead. The bloodkin fell backward under his weight, and then a new weight hit him from behind. The one he'd disarmed and sent running had circled back empty-handed, throwing himself onto Diomedes' back, teeth sinking into his neck and shoulder. Blood ran hot down his chest. He slammed backward into the cage, and the prisoners inside grabbed at the bloodkin, helping tear him loose. "Get off me, you foul beast!" Diomedes growled, driving an elbow back hard enough to knock the wind from him and let the prisoners finish the job. He turned in time to trip another one, this one swinging a sword straight into the fire. The last of them, armed with a club, caught him low, hammering into his ribs and stomach. Something cracked, pain lancing through him, and he gasped, but he was already moving, grabbing the man by the throat with both hands and driving him to the ground. The bloodkin thrashed under him, pulse hammering beneath Diomedes' grip, until a sharp twist ended it. Behind them, the one in the fire was still screaming, still burning, still trying to beat out flames that wouldn't go out. That left one. Diomedes stood, blood running down his arm and chest, his ribs and side already darkening with bruises beneath the skin, and still a dangerous thing to look at. He picked the club up off the ground and went after the last bloodkin, the one who'd bitten him, who broke and tried to run past him in a final desperate bid. The club caught him full in the chest and put him on the ground. Diomedes walked over and finished it with one blow across the face. He stood surrounded by the fallen bloodkin. He panted as the pain returned, as the adrenaline wore off. He looked at the three men in the cage. He walked up and smashed the lock with the club, breaking both. He sighed. He had hoped for an intact weapon at the end of this, but he would need to double-check the bodies. He opened the cage door. "You are free," he said. The best-dressed of the three merchants came out first. A fine, if travel-stained tunic of dark blue with bronze buttons and silver beads, a skirt of matching color with a strip of silver down each leg, and no shoes at all. He was of average height and a bit heavy-set. With long black hair he clearly preferred kept clean and pinned up, and a braided beard. His skin was sunburned, his eyes dark brown, and his hands were missing rings. Diomedes could tell by the pale, untanned bands circling his fingers where they'd once sat. He introduced himself first. "I am Vosdra of the Silver Spire. I thank you for the rescue," he said with a southern continental accent. He might be a merchant of the Silver Spire, but he'd clearly been raised, or at least schooled, along the southern Great River. Not uncommon, but something Diomedes noticed all the same. "I am Diomedes. Why do you travel with so few? Where are your guards?" Diomedes asked. Vosdra glowered. "We had hired a dozen before setting out for Ikonos, here in the Dragon's Tail, but over half were plagued with illness before we'd made it halfway. It slowed us considerably, which made us easy targets for these bloodkin," he explained. "And the rest died in the attack," Diomedes finished. He was moving among the corpses and found one of the rusted iron swords. It would have to do. He slid it into his belt. "Most," Vosdra said, pointing to a stew pot crowded with bones, large bones, human bones. Diomedes shook his head. Vile abominations, a corruption of the proud people he'd once ridden alongside. "We were only spared to see if ransom could be extracted from our employer or patron, but they had not determined if it was worth it, as copper or silver would not really get them much if they could not spend it." Vosdra turned and helped the other two merchants, his assistants, out of the cage. They were dressed in the same color of blue but lacked the flair that Vosdra had. "I am surprised you helped us," Vosdra said. "I am." He paused. "Heading the same way as you, and could use a friend in a new city," he explained. He leaned down to check the bloodkin for anything else worth taking and winced in pain from his ribs. "Let my assistant take a look at you. He is a healer," Vosdra said, motioning to the younger of the two assistants, tan-skinned and less sunburned than his master, with shorter hair and a patchy stubble beard. "Without my books and components, my spells are limited," the young one explained. "I want no true spells. They carry a price I'm not willing to pay," Diomedes said. Diomedes stood and let the young man examine him. He was half a head shorter than he was. The healer swept up a handful of ash from the fire's edge and packed it into Diomedes's two still bleeding wounds, which was not a pleasant sensation. He wrapped both hands firmly around Diomedes's forearm and began to chant. The pain that followed was searing, and something working beneath the skin where the wound had been. Diomedes winced through it. "The heat and flame purify the wound of any ailment or poison," the young man said. Diomedes didn't fully believe him. He had a deep, standing distrust of magic in any form. The healer repeated the process on the bite marks at his shoulder. These were shallower than the arm wound, but they burned worse. It was only when he began tracing something onto Diomedes's tender ribs that Diomedes pulled away. The young man started to object. Diomedes only growled at him. He finished the work anyway, the ancient script settling into skin still darkening and swelling beneath it. Diomedes braced himself. The first two had hurt, but he'd reset a rib before, once, and that had been worse than either. He had no idea what magic would feel like doing the same job, but he was fairly certain it would be just as bad, or worse. He was right. The words of power left the healer's mouth, and the pain hit like a hot poker driven straight through him. He could feel the bone shifting beneath his skin, knitting itself back together, and he let out a low, pained groan as it finished. He'd been sweating before. Now he was drenched in it. He lowered himself down and sat, waiting for his breath to come back. "We should keep moving. The rest won't likely stay out in this dark much longer, and I counted at least another 6 if each of those extra bedrolls belongs to someone," Diomedes said, nodding at the bedrolls scattered near the fire. The merchants nodded back. "The caravan was insured, but we need to be alive to claim it," Vosdra agreed. "Lead the way." Diomedes led them quietly through the ruins toward the road. The farther he could put between them and the bloodkin, the better. There was a chance the survivors would come after them for revenge, though it seemed more likely they'd simply keep the loot for themselves, now that there were fewer of them to split it with. He kept them on a path parallel to the road, since the caravan was likely still sitting where it had been ambushed and navigated by the dark outline of the mountains against the sky. They held a steady, if slow, pace until dawn. As the sun peeked over the mountains to the east, another town came into view. Ikonos, or what remained of it. Ikonos, much like the ruins they'd just fled, had once been a grand, magnificent walled city, built in several concentric rings, though now only the innermost ring still held a living population, gathered in the shadow of the citadel that still loomed at its center. Its walls and citadel had once been dark green stone, said to have been imbued with magic in every brick to protect it against any attack, and had since been charred to a deep, uniform black by dragonfire, the same fire that had scorched the land around it. Even as the landscape faded from stone to grey ash, beyond the walls, the stones themselves never lightened from that burned black. Few remembered the city had ever been green at all. That memory survived only in old tomes, in the minds of those who studied history, or in people like Diomedes, who'd learned the continent's myths and legends growing up far from where they were made. He'd also learned that Ikonos had once been a great seat of power, and that its name roughly translated to the Green Throne. A coincidence with the rumor that the dragon who'd burned the continent had itself been green. They reached the outer walls of Ikonos and were met by the city's guards, dressed in heavy single-piece cloaks and armed with bronze shields, helmets and spears. The guards halted the group. "The inner ring is all that's safe. The outer rings are too dangerous. We'll escort you in," one of them said. A commotion rippled through the gathered guards as the great blackened gate swung open, and they dropped to their knees as one, a regal woman stepping out from the shadow behind it. She was tall and thin, wrapped in robes simple in cut, but heavy with fine cloth, her alabaster face lost beneath a deep hood, her hands sheathed in thin, perfectly fitted gloves. Even with her features shadowed, Diomedes caught the flash of her eyes as she looked up, pale, ash-grey, as if they held some light of their own, though none was there to catch. She had the bearing of an impressive woman, the kind he might have mistaken for a noble's wife or a merchant's spouse if he were less observant. But there was something more to her, something with real weight behind it. "Lady Aklis," Vosdra said, dropping to his knees, "we were ambushed. Our cargo is lost. We would have died at their hands, all three of us, if not for this man." She didn't so much as glance at him. Her gaze stayed fixed on Diomedes as she lifted a hand, unhurried, and the merchant fell silent. "Is this true?" she asked, in an accent Diomedes couldn't place. She tilted her head, studying him. He nodded. Something about her had the feel of a witch, and he didn't trust it. "There was more in that caravan than goods, Vosdra. Why do you think I gave you the coin to hire extra guards?" She turned back to Diomedes before Vosdra could answer. "I'll decide on a fitting punishment for him later. For now, you're coming with me to the throne." She caught the look on his face at that word. He liked it no better than he wanted to follow her without a reason. "I'll pay you well for saving Vosdra and his assistants. But I have work that pays a good deal more than that, starting with recovering what that caravan was carrying. What do you say?" Diomedes scowled, but the familiar pull settled toward her anyway, the same one that had dragged him here in the first place, running counter to every instinct telling him to keep his distance from this woman. Still, he needed the coin. Weapons and armor weren't cheap to replace. He bowed his head and fell into step behind her. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you'd like to hear more of the Tomb of the Dragon King, a Land Under a Red Sun audio serial on the Outer Almanac.